Formed communion with heresy leads man to hell, by Mr. Dimitrios Hatzinikolaou, professor of economics at the University of Ioannina, both the Holy Scripture and the Holy Fathers, in order to make it absolutely clear that knowing communion with heresy leads man to hell, strictly and with strong characterizations and exhortations forbade such communion. In proof of this assertion, we quote below many hagiographic and patristic passages, which we find in the writings of the Holy Fathers, in order to confront the contemporary heresy of ecumenism, which is preached by the modern leaders of the Church. For example, the ecumenists admit all Christian heresies and all religions as different paths for man to reach God. All men believe in the same God, each in his own way, falsely say the patriarchs Athenagoras and Bartholomew. Let us therefore abolish the doctrines of the Trinity of God, of his incarnation, etc., and to construct new ones so that they are acceptable to modern man, suggested the Archbishop of America, Iakovos, in his interview with the worldwide circulation newspaper, New York Times, the 25th of September, 1967 p. 40. When I first read this news in the book Kisses of Judas in 1997, I was a resident of Adelaide, South Australia, and followed the new calendar. I thought the old calendarists are surely lying about this, because it is never possible for a bishop of the Church of Christ to propose the abolition of orthodox dogmas and not be deposed. In order to solve my dilemma, therefore, I visited the Adelaide Central Library and requested the New York Times newspaper of the 25th of September, 1967, which existed in digital form, and specifically in microfiche form, that is, in a film wound on small reels. I photocopied this interview and have been distributing it ever since, because Iakovos remained Archbishop of America for 30 more years after his above-mentioned proposal to abolish the orthodox dogmas, which in fact he described in this interview as Greek old clothes. Then I began to study the calendar question carefully. 2 years later, I completely severed ecclesiastical communion with the ecumenists. The Apostle Paul says, "Depart from them." Prop. 16, 17, 18. Avoid such people. Guard what is entrusted to you, turning away from the profane and empty chatter and oppositions of false knowledge, which some, professing to be of the faith, have thrust aside. 1 Tim 6, 5, 6:20, 21. Therefore do not become partakers with them, and do not share in the unfruitful works of darkness. EPH 5, 6, 11. Abstain from all forms of evil. 1 Thess 5, 22. Stand firm and hold fast to the traditions. If any brother walks disorderly and not according to the tradition, you will be sent to him. 2 Thessalonians 2:15 and 3:6. Continue in what you have learned and have been assured of. 2 Timothy 3:14. If you are being preached to others besides what you received, let him be accursed. Gal 1, 8, 9. What fellowship has light with darkness? And what agreement has Christ with Belial? Or what fellowship has a believer with an unbeliever? Wherefore come out from among them, and be ye separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing. 2 Corinthians 6:14, 18, emphasis added. Athanasius the Great says, every man having discerned from God will be damned, having followed an endless shepherd, and having accepted false glory as true. For who has fellowship with light in darkness? Emphasis added. Basil the Great says, those who pretend to profess the sound faith, but give communion to those of a different language, such, if they do not send them away after an order, should not only be kept incommunicado, but should not even be called brothers. PG 160, P 101. St. Ignatius the God-bearer says, everyone who says, go, despite the established things, even if he is trustworthy, even if he fasts, or becomes a virgin, or performs signs, or prophesies, will seem to you a wolf in sheep's clothing, working the destruction of sheep. PG 160, P 101, emphasis added. St. Theodore the Stuardite says the following important things about obedience to abbots who are either heretics or who are orthodox, but commune with heretics. For we have an order from this apostle. Gal. 1. 8. Despite what we have received, despite the rules of the councils from time to time, whether universal or local, if he teaches or commands us to do anything, he is unacceptable and not to be counted among the lot of the saints, emphasis added. We do not separate ourselves from the Church of the North and the West and the sea for one man, and even from this, that is, except for the adulterers. For these are not the Church of the Lord. Epistles, Etterlipia 178, emphasis added. Since the saints said that the adulterers, that is, those who approve of the emperor's illegal marriage, do not belong to the Church of Christ, imagine what he would say about the ecumenists if he were alive today. I guess he would characterize them as the synagogue of Satan. The judgment is harsh, but in accordance with the teaching of the Church. Not if he gives all the money in the world to the heretics and communes with them does he become a friend of God, but an enemy. And what do I say of communion? If in stink and ointment and friendship he agrees with the heretics, he is responsible. Epistles, P. 298. Beware of the soul-destroying heresy, whose fellowship is the alienation of Christ. Epistles, P. 354, emphasis added. Even Saint Athanasius, who protects us, has no communion with heretics, but not with those who commune with the ungodly. Epistles, 448, emphasis added. For Chrysostom, not only the heretics, but also those who communed with such people, denounced them as enemies of God with a loud and many-voiced voice. PG 99, P. 1049, emphasis added. Those who were perfect in the faith were shipwrecked, but those who, if they were not sunk in their thoughts, nevertheless joined the communion of heresy. PG 99, P. 1164a, emphasis added. That is, those who have the orthodox faith, but are in communion with the heresy of ecumenism, as the canonized saints and the conservative new calendarists are doing today, will fight alongside the ecumenists. St. Mark the Gentleman, excellently summarizing the orthodox teaching of apotheosis, says, all the teachers of the Church, all the councils, and all the divine scriptures admonish those who are of different opinions to flee and to separate from their communion. PG 160, P 101, emphasis added. Referring to the Latin-minded metropolitan of Athens, the saint writes the following important things in one of his letters to the hieromonk Theophanes. I am worthy of your holiness, therefore that, taking up the zeal for God, you may exhort the priests of God to avoid in all ways the communion of him, and neither to concelebrate with him, nor to commemorate him at all, nor to lead this high priest, but to be led by a wolf and a hired hand. Therefore, you also, brothers, flee the communion of the uncommunicated, and the commemoration of the uncommunicated. Behold, I, Mark the sinner, tell you that he who mentions the Pope as an orthodox high priest is guilty of fulfilling all the duties of the Latins, even to the point of shaving his beard, and he who thinks Latin will be judged along with the Latins, and will be considered a transgressor of the faith. G. 160, pp. 1097, 1100, emphasis added. Consequently, those who commemorate the Latin-minded Patriarch Bartholomew, who sings the fame and blessed is he who comes for the Pope, are violators of the faith. As Metropolitan Philaret of the Russian Church in the diaspora denounced in 1969 in an open letter to the Archbishop of America, Jacob, Patriarch Athenagoras had included the name of the Pope of Rome, as well as all the confessions of the East and the West, in the diptychs, which means that he considered all these heretics to be orthodox. On Mount Athos today, only the traditionalists, that is, the genuine Esphigmenites and the Zealot Fathers, maintain an orthodox stance who do not commemorate Mr. Bartholomew and are persecuted for it. St. Mark the Gentleman emphasizes that, in matters of faith, there is no room for compromise diminishes faith, and that there is no middle ground between truth and falsehood. The author's emphasis. The Holy Fathers who fought against Patriarch Becos and bore witness to him with great joy, in the well-known letter they wrote in 1275 to King Michael Palaiologos, reacting to the pressures they were under to mention the Pope after the pseudo-council of Lyons, invoked among others the following passage from the New Testament. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your house, and do not say, rejoice, for he who says, rejoice, shares in his works. Evil, John 2, 10, 11. They analyze this passage as follows, in the free translation of the writer. If we are prevented from simply greeting him, the Pope, on the road and from introducing him into an ordinary house, then how shall we introduce him? Not into a house, but into the temple of God. And if simply greeting him is equivalent to communion with his evil deeds, how much more so is remembering him aloud in the presence of the divine and terrible mysteries? If he who stands before us is the self-truth, then how is it possible to tolerate this great lie, namely, to classify him among the other Orthodox patriarchs? Will we play a theater in the face of the terrible mysteries? How is it possible for the Orthodox soul to tolerate such a thing without immediately distancing itself from the celebrants, considering them to be priests? For the Orthodox Church considers the mention of the name of the hierarch in the face of the sacred mysteries as perfect communion. In the interpretation of the divine service, it is written that the celebrant mentions the name of the hierarch to show that he submits to him and that he is a partaker of his faith. And our great father and confessor, Theodore the Studite, says this: communion is polluted by the mere mention of the heretic, even when the one mentioning it is orthodox. But shall we accept the memorial service according to the economy? And how is it possible to accept an economy that desecrates the divine mysteries and expels the Holy Spirit from them, thus depriving the faithful of the forgiveness of their sins and the grace of adoption? Is there anything more harmful than this? Communion with them is an obvious abdication and overthrow of orthodoxy. For the one who receives a heretic is subject to his crime, and the one who does not receive communion is incommunicable, as one who confuses the canon of the Church, the emphasis of the author. So, according to the Athonite Fathers of 1275, hieros-sabbateurs are the ones who commemorate heretics. As is known, the then ecumenists of Vecco beheaded some of these Athonite fathers, hanged others, burned others alive, and drowned others. You see, the path of orthodox confession is narrow, thorny, and martyric, which few follow, while the path of perdition is broad, which many unfortunately follow. Another example of orthodox confession is the stance that the Orthodox maintained towards the Latinists after the pseudo-council of Ferrara, Florence. They do not commune with the Latinists, they do not communicate with them, and they do not commemorate the bishops who signed the false Union of Florence. The Orthodox plenum recognized only the voice of Mark Eugene as the voice of a good shepherd. The voices of the Latinist bishops seem to be the voices of strangers. Have the current saints of the Holy Land not learned anything from the supposedly superior teaching and practice of the saints in similar circumstances? Or have they been taught the philosophy and are applying the methods of the traitors and persecutors of orthodoxy?